So we're moving on to our next session. We are very lucky, excuse me, to be joined by Dr. Seth Pollack. Dr. Pollack is the Stephen T. Rosen Professor of Cancer Biology at Lurie Cancer Center at Northwestern. Philip, I know you're going to be moderating this session, so I'm going to toss it over to you.
Thank you so much, Tim. And yes, it is a true pleasure to welcome Dr. Pollack to our program. He is a member of our medical advisory board and a true friend of the sarcoma community. Welcome, Dr. Pollack.
Thanks so much, Phil. It's really such a pleasure to be here. You guys just do such amazing work, and I know quite a few patients that have been helped by you guys, and it's been a pleasure working with you guys over the years. You guys really do a great job getting education and information out to patients, and really helping the sarcoma community understand their disease.
Thank you. Thank you. Our goal always is to make this understandable for people. It can
Mhm.
be very complex, a lot of big words, a lot of
Mhm.
acronyms, and we like to bring it down to the basics. Of course, we want to give sophisticated information,
Mhm.
complex information to people, but these programs are really designed to break it down into understandable bits. And we really appreciate somebody like you who does clinical research day in, day out on sarcomas explaining these things for us. So thank you. The first thing I want to point out is, Hope just gave us a great presentation, great overview of clinical trials, but they're somewhat different for sarcoma patients. So we're going to spend some time with you kind of getting at why it's a little different for sarcoma patients, why sarcoma is different for clinical research, and really kind of dial it in for our particular community. So the first topic I wanted to kind of talk about with you, which is something most of us know, is sarcomas are very rare, and the subtypes of sarcomas, there's very many of them, are even rarer. So, what in terms of just typical clinical trials, say, on lung cancer or breast cancer with thousands and thousands, if not millions of people, what's different about sarcoma because of its rarity? How does that change a clinical trial in sarcoma?
Sure. Well, the first thing is clinical trials are difficult in sarcoma because of the rarity. So just let's start there and take just a one step back because I think you're spot on. Um, I think we just had a great introduction to clinical trials in general, and sarcoma clinical trials are first of all unique because for a lot of patients, we just, because of the rarity, because of all these different things, our treatments are not as good as they are for other diseases. I think, when you talk about clinical trials generally, even outside of cancer, you might be talking about things like a preventative measure or something that is just kind of tweaking things at the edges. But our patients in sarcoma often they really need we really need better treatments, right? So when I offer a patient a clinical trial, um, I usually offer it because I really think it's like the best option for my patient, right? So if we had fantastic options for every patient, um, we a lot of patients, we wouldn't be recommending as many clinical trials, right? If I have a patient who I'm, you know, pretty much, very, very, very confident, this is going to be no question, 99% we're going to cure you. Then it takes like a really crazy trial, really, that's a very special trial that I think might help that patient, and there are settings, in some cancers, where therapy has gotten so good that the clinical trials start to be like, well, maybe we could do less. Maybe we don't need to give you as much chemotherapy, right? Maybe we can dial it down a bit. In sarcoma, unfortunately, we're usually not there, right? Unfortunately, most patients, uh, well, a lot of patients are either at high risk or they've developed incurable disease and we're trying to help them, or they're, some patients, probably there's some patients on this call that are really far into their cancer journey and are really need something new. So that's kind of where I'm starting from. So now, sarcoma. I'm always telling people that even though sarcomas are rare, they're not that rare, right? There's over 20,000 people in the US diagnosed with sarcoma every year. I was just talking to some people yesterday. I was, talking about colon cancer as having 100,000 people. Sarcoma is, you know, uh, that's 5 times more common than sarcoma, but I think you hear about that a lot more than 5 times as much, right? I think we're underrepresented in terms of the cancers, and that's true not just for the people on your street. It's also true for the drug companies. It's also true for people in the government, for the NIH. And I think one thing that you guys help with is getting the word out about how sarcoma is important, and that really makes a difference because even though 1% of all and I tell people when I'm seeing sometimes I'll be seeing somebody for the first time, I'm telling them about sarcoma and they've never heard about it before. And I said, well, I bet now that you've heard about sarcoma, you're going to start to realize that it's actually been around you. You might realize that your cousin's friend, neighbor, you know, was affected by it or something like that, that it's actually out there in the world. Um, but anyways, because it's rare, I think there's less enthusiasm for drug companies to test their brand new drug on sarcoma. All these clinical trials are a huge investment. Um, when somebody goes on a clinical trial, the per, because sometimes I have to do budgets for these clinical trials, right? The clinical trials, they cost millions of dollars, and sometimes on a per patient basis, it's could be like $30,000 per patient, right? And just in all the different costs that you don't see in terms of the in terms of the drug, in terms of the coordinate, not that the patient is paying, right? The patient, Hope mentioned that usually a good clinical trial shouldn't have any additional cost to the patient. Um, but it's what I'm saying is it's expensive for the drug companies to test their new drug in sarcoma patients. And and it takes a longer time because sometimes the patients are harder to find. Now, I still don't think that accounts for the disparity in clinical research in sarcoma because I can tell you that some sarcoma clinical trials can accrue very rapidly. Right now, I lead a big trial from ECOG Akron. That's one of the NCI cooperative groups. And we're breaking all kinds of records in terms of how fast patients are accruing. So this is a nationwide phase 3 trial. We just had a trial in leiomyosarcoma patients that completed accrual very rapidly and, fast enough that the company was really shocked. And there is a lot of things that actually being rare offers that can actually really be valuable that I think are sometimes overlooked. So oh, sorry, yeah, please, stop me.
Yeah, let me jump in for a second.
I could talk forever.
Of course, and I appreciate everything you've said so far, and I want to hear more. Uh, you mentioned a phase 3 trial, and Hope didn't mention this, but I wanted to kind of walk through a little
Yeah,
bit.
yeah.
When you go through the phases, a phase 1 trial is quite small. It's often like 30 people, right? And then when you get to a phase 3 trial and out to a phase 4, when you're already out in the world, these are thousands of people that you're doing the research on. Isn't that correct?
Right. Yeah. So this particular phase 3 trial is going to have 360 something patients. So that's actually not a big phase 3 trial, right? But it is a trial that it requires, it's going to be sites all around the US and Canada, right? That's what we have. And and usually when you get to a phase 3 trial, you're testing something that has gone through a lot of uh, inspection, right? So this particular phase 3 trial is testing two very commonly used drugs together. So it's testing doxorubicin, which I'm sure many people on the call have had, the red devil, right? That's kind of the most commonly used chemotherapy in sarcoma. And immunotherapy, so Keytruda. So that is like either patients will get the combination or they'll get doxorubicin alone. So this is written for patients where what you'd get normally is doxorubicin alone, and you're getting the chance to have something extra, right? So that's really the phase 3 trial. So phase 3, so in as I said, every trial that we offer, we only offer it if we think that this trial is going to help the patient, right? So if it's something extra that you might be getting that you couldn't or otherwise get. So this particular trial for a lot of patients, it'll be the frontline treatment, right? So usually in the front line, we actually do have some agents that can work for a lot of people. In the front line, you should be getting a treatment that has a chance of shrinking your, this is for the advanced sarcoma. So sarcoma that that has either spread or is not able to be resected surgically. Um, but usually, we're hopeful with that first chemotherapy that we try. So um, the the phase 3 trial, we wouldn't offer, or we wouldn't be offering like a compound that had never been tried before, right? Or that we only had a little bit of data. Um, let's contrast. Oh, yes, please stop, Sonny.
Yeah, I was going to say, and why is that so important that we have a lot of people at that phase? What's happening? Can you talk a little bit about statistical significance and why we need more people?
Yeah,
We can't just do a trial on 5 people. We don't really get much from that. Why do we need larger groups of people?
right. So, well, this brings us to a conversation about phase 2 trials, right? So, in a phase 2 trial, that's really, let's say you have a drug and the safe, you're sure about the safety. Or you have two drugs that have been used apart, but you think maybe using them together might be even better than using them sequentially, right? Um, what you'll do is you'll try a phase 2 trial, and a phase 2 trial will maybe treat 20 or 30 patients, and like in a single arm trial, and you'll try and get a sense about what the response rate is, how long people's disease is controlled on it, but you don't. The problem is, well, let's say you did this trial. If you did in this trial, you have a chemotherapy, it's active. If you tried to do this chemotherapy with we actually did do a phase 2 trial for this chemotherapy and the immunotherapy before we brought it to phase 3. We had great response rates. We had great progression-free survival. But you might say, well, maybe your patients at your center, maybe your population is skewed. Maybe it's just that I'm a great doctor and they all do well, right? So, you really need to have a randomized trial to prove that this benefit that you see is better than the standard of care, which in this case would be doxorubicin alone. So and that means that we need a big number of patients because if you just put them in two buckets, right, and you just have 5 patients here, 5 patients there, and you get 4 responses in one and 3 in the other, well, that could just be coin flips, right? And as they get bigger and bigger, if you're seeing a benefit, you're more and more confident that the benefit that you're seeing is real.
Got you, got you.
Yeah.
Okay, and you mentioned that the research often takes place in subtypes of sarcoma. So you're focusing on what you think an agent is good for a subtype or a few subtypes of sarcoma. There's not generally a lot of things that are tested across all sarcomas. Is that the case?
That is the case, and it's becoming more and more the case, right? So sometimes when there's a brand new drug and it's never been tried in any sarcoma, and there's it's kind of a drug with maybe potential for broad applicability, I might pitch to a company, hey, just try this everywhere, and let's like look for a signal, And then maybe once we see a signal, we can drill down on that sarcoma subtype. So every once in a while, there's a trial like that. But once we get to a phase where we're really getting serious about looking for the activity, it does need to be in a specific sarcoma type because sarcomas are so distinct from each other, right? There's some sarcomas that are really genetically complex. And yeah, when I say complex, I don't mean necessarily difficult, but what I mean is there's a lot of different genetic changes that happen, right? And a lot of different types of genetic changes. Whereas other sarcomas, they may be just as difficult to treat, but they're simple, right? We know there's only one gene that's different in this tumor. It's a fusion. We've got like a bunch of people. They're trying to figure out how to like target that fusion, but we can't figure it out. And so they may be very, very different from one another. And as I'm sure a lot of the people on this call are aware, these tumors can behave different ways. They can start in different locations. They respond differently to different drugs. Um, so yeah, these days we're really the trials need to be drilled in on specific populations, and that can be very difficult for some of these ultra rare subtypes, which make up actually a large proportion of sarcomas, right? So when but when I pitch a trial to a drug company of an ultra rare subtype, what I say is, look, sometimes the FDA will even grant you approval based on a small single arm trial for a rare subtype. So there is an advantage. There are reasons that we can convince pharma to invest in rare cancers. The other thing that sometimes these cancers have very unique biology. So, for example, there's a drug called Fiaro that you may have heard about. That's an FDA-approved drug for pecoma, which is a rare sarcoma subtype. That was approved based on a small single-arm trial. That's an mTOR inhibitor, and in that specific case, the company was thinking, well, maybe there's lots of cancers out there that are driven by mTOR, but only like a few percent in lung cancer, a few percent in colon cancer. Maybe it adds up to a lot, but this is a population where we think every single patient is going to have their tumor driven by mTOR, and we could put together a case series and get an FDA approval. And once we have an approval, it's going to be easier to do all kinds of other things. So that was how it worked in that particular case of that rare sarcoma subtype.
So that's interesting. So sarcomas, we've always grouped them together, even back into the 19th century. We weren't looking at the genetics, the stuff
Mhm.
that we've learned about in the 20th century.
Yeah.
And now we're finding, aren't we, that sarcomas, many of them are related to other conditions even more closely than they are to some sarcomas.
Right, right. Based on some of the genetic changes in molecular pathways, I think that is true. Yes, absolutely.
And so, what if you can tell me? This is a phrase I think people will hear as they move forward, not just single arm trials. What's a basket trial?
Right. So a basket trial is Um, well, let's take this situation that I was just telling you about. Let's say I'm kind of trying to pitch to a company, oh, just try it in all the different sarcomas, and maybe if we see something, then we'll drill down on it, right? And maybe if you're a company, you might say, well, that's like a little bit disorganized, right? If you just go for everybody, right? Maybe we want to, but I take your point. We should try it in a bunch of different patients, a bunch of different types, and go further if we see a signal. Well, maybe instead we could have a basket trial. So we're not going to treat every sarcoma, but we're going to treat the sarcomas that we think that are most likely to have benefit. And we're not just going to do one, but we're going to treat some synovial sarcomas. We're going to treat some liposarcomas. We're going to treat some chondrosarcomas. We're going to treat 8 in each basket. And then if we see a signal in one, then we'll sort of expand that group. So that would be an example of a basket trial.
Terrific. So, kind of gone full circle. We've talked about rarity,
Mhm,
and we've talked about how there are a whole bunch of different types of sarcomas, but
mhm,
we've now kind of modified trial design. It's not just exactly what Hope was
mhm,
talking about, phase one, phase two, phase
mhm.
three, phase
Yeah.
four. the exact same number of participants in each, the way we did back in the 60s and
Yeah.
70s. Now there's some flexibility and some realization that we can do research in rare cancers and rare conditions
Mhm.
using things like basket trials.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think we're making progress. We are making progress in terms of like designing trials that are that in a way where we can try and come up with new therapies for as many patients as we can, but also, be mindful to the reality of the economy and trying to uh, find angles to convince people to invest in sarcoma, to show them that sarcoma is a place where they can make money. Because the companies that are uh, commercializing drugs in sarcoma, I think they actually do well, actually.
Terrific. So I wanted to leave some time. We have a lot of questions for you. People
Hmm.
are really interested in talking with you. Let me pose a couple of these for you.
Yeah, sure.
First question we had is, can you ever join a phase 3 trial that has already started? Is that a possibility?
Yes. So the way a phase 3 trial works is it'll start enrollment, and it's not the trial doesn't start at one moment. There'll be an enrollment period, and usually that period continues until they reach their accrual goal. And there might be different cohorts in the trial, right? So, for example, in the trial I was telling you about, we're accruing undifferentiated pleomorphic sarcoma and dedifferentiated liposarcomas, right? So, right now, if you have so there's 180 slots for undifferentiated pleomorphic sarcoma. So, um, and that trial opened over a year ago, right? But that's how long it takes to accrue 180 patients, right? And right now, if you meet the eligibility criteria, um, you could enroll. But that cohort in the trial is close to accruing. So once we have our 180 patients, we're going to close accrual. Now, in that particular trial, there's also a dedifferentiated liposarcoma cohort, which has quite a few slots. So that cohort will be open probably for another year, maybe even. And then we'll get all the slots filled for that, and then we'll close it, and then the trial will continue because there's still going to be patients enrolled on the trial getting their treatment on the trial. So that means that those patients are part of the trial. They're still getting their study treatments. That means our research coordinators are still working on the trial because they're helping those patients. But what we're not doing is we're not accruing the patients. And we'll continue watching those patients, potentially even, I mean, in some trials, they'll keep watching the patients even when there's no more patients on treatment. And actually, because this trial will follow patients for survival, it'll be watching patients really for the rest of their lives and potentially. And even after they're done with this treatment, there's still going to be somebody working on the trial, um, collecting data until we get an answer on overall survival. So that would be kind of the sort of long-term follow-up phase of the trial. Uh, as the data matures, right? So the answer is yes.
Okay, kind of a follow-on question
Uh-huh.
in a way. One audience member wants to know, since it's hard to accrue for these trials, why is there so little collaboration with hospitals in Europe in particular? And why aren't patients globally given more access to these trials? Why are they, sort of US trials and Europe trials and sort of segmented in that way?
Yeah, that is a really good question. I mean, we really wanna collaborate with Europe more. And I know Denise Renke from SARC, formerly of SARC, is going to still involved with SARC, but former head of SARC, is going to be speaking to you guys in a second. I know that's something that SARC worked a lot on, was trying to bridge some of these trials to Europe. I have that's something with this phase 3 trial that I'm working on right now. For example, We really tried to open it in Europe. Um, there are a lot of barriers, unfortunately, to having trials that are global. I think companies want to have trials that are global because I think they like the idea of a global approval. There's completely different things that you need to have for European approval and American approval. Um, for some of these smaller trials, it's just going to be very difficult because just in terms of making sure that everything is done in a way that satisfies our regulators, our FDA, our IRBs, and stuff like that, and that also satisfies the European regulators. Um, in terms of money, for in the case of my trial, that was the barrier. This was an NIH funded trial, and they allowed. For reasons that actually get beyond me. For some reason, we were able to do it and get it open in Canada, but we weren't able to get it open in Europe. So yeah, it's a shame, but it's difficult.
Interesting. I'm going to ask one more question, but there are more in
Please.
chat. If you have a couple minutes,
Oh,
I know you're very
yep,
busy, but if you could maybe
sure.
stay on for a little while and type some answers in the chat, that would be so much appreciated, Dr. Pollack. One last question that I think is a good one to end on for the spoken portion. How can we do a better job of informing patients and their families about available clinical trials? Is there something better out there than clinicaltrials.gov, which, as we all know, is pretty hard to search and pretty complicated? Do you know of anything that's better, a better way for patients to get informed about available trials?
Well, I think the best thing is that I know you guys are really passionate about is getting a second opinion with a real sarcoma specialist if you're not seeing one right now, because so there are trials out there that I'm not aware of, right? That's like I don't know about every single thing going on, but I'm my antenna is up. I kind of know when there's something that people are excited about, and I have a sense about the landscape out there. And I certainly know about all of the multi-center trials that are going on. One thing that, if you're looking for a tool, and I AI can really I hate these, I sometimes I have people come in with reams of pages from AI and it's kind of going all over the place and pushing people in the wrong direction. But, when I do have like a medicine question that I kind of want to get AI's take on. The platform that I use is called openevidence.com, right? And that particular one is pretty good at sorting through clinical trials. So like, you can kind of give it a bunch of information and it might, I think it does spit out good stuff. I think it's better than the other ones for medical stuff. So that would be a good place to get like a list that you could bring to your doctor and talk about.
Terrific. We'll also be having a presentation later from Massive Bio, and they work with the American Cancer Society and have an
Mhm.
AI-driven tool, and also I think it's a nurse practitioner that matches you with trials that might be good for you. So we'll hear more about that later in the program, and that's another resource we might talk about. Dr. Pollack, again, I want to thank you so much for spending the time today. There are more questions in the chat. If you could kindly take a shot at the ones you feel like you can respond to. We'd really very much appreciate it. And again, thank you so much for being on our program today.
Sure thing. It's been a pleasure. Been great. Thank you.